Kang Hyun-ah, gazing into the fuzzy contours of her workspace, felt every shout from her boss as a deep blow to her soul. These sounds, brimming with irritation and frustration, hung in the air, making her feel even more isolated and unwanted. The endless demands to work overtime were like shackles that restrained her freedom, leaving her alone with the darkness of night that continuously enveloped her workplace after all her colleagues had gone home. On one of those moonless evenings, when the silence of the office was broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the rustle of papers, Kang Hyun-ah found herself lying on the cold floor. There were only shards around her, fragments of unrealized ideas and shattered hopes, like a metaphor for her own life in pieces. Not realizing what caused her sudden loneliness among the shards of her own existence, Kang Hyun-ah gave herself over to the darkness, fading into incomprehension and isolation. Her last moments were filled with a sense of utter loneliness, symbolizing her life's journey, which she walked alone, finding no understanding or support. As if embodying a surreal image that interrupted the grim reality, the monitor suddenly came to life, sparkling with life in the absolute darkness. The next second turned Kang Hyun-ah into Bita, a character she had created but never fully understood. Bita, unlike her creator, was an entity in a virtual world where the yelling was not for her poor performance, but for disobedience in front of Margaret. This game, Guardian Garden, was a dating simulator where players chose their hero from 4 possible characters for virtual romantic adventures. But Bita had a unique place in the story. She was the antagonist, the villain who brought dissonance to the world of perfect dates and romantic stories. Created by Kang Hyun-ah, Bita has become a symbol of misunderstood and unrecognized creative will, an embodiment of rebellion against established norms and expectations. In this parallel world created through the efforts of the team in which Kang Hyun-ah labored, Bita lived against all odds, representing the idea that even in a fantasy world there is room for those who choose their own path different from the set one. Bita Alden, daughter of the Marquis, was the epitome of beauty as one could only imagine in one's wildest dreams. Her looks could not be disputed. She possessed the sophistication and nobility that could claim the attention of the emperor himself, putting her family on par with the highest-ranking aristocrats. But behind this facade of angelic beauty was a character full of passions and vices that could only cause horror and rejection. Margaret was certainly the heart and soul of the story, a protagonist whose kindness and sincerity knew no bounds. In her naivete, she regarded Bita as a friend, believing there was more than aristocratic arrogance lurking beneath her cold and harsh exterior. However, Bita did not live up to her expectations, instead of support and friendship causing Margaret only pain and suffering. It was a character steeped in self-righteousness and selfishness, disregarding the feelings and interests of others. The tragedy of Bita Alden reached its climax at the end of her life's journey, where she fell at the hands of a male character chosen by the player for her journey in this virtual world. This act was not a simple choice in the game. It became a symbol of inevitable karma for deeds committed, emphasizing that evil, sooner or later, meets its justice. Ironically, even if this character turned out to be Bita's brother, his actions were justified by the circumstances in which his sister had doomed herself to a sad outcome. At this point, when the brother expressed his disapproval, it was clear that even blood ties could not justify or correct deep-rooted character flaws. Thus, the story of Bita Alden and Margaret became not just a tale of friendship and betrayal, but a profound lesson that true beauty lies not in appearance, but in a person's actions and deeds, their ability to sympathize, understand, and sincerely interact with others. Bita remembered that the reason Luther had yelled at her was because Bita had already refused to see Margaret 4 times this week. The moment Luther, overwhelmed with anger over Bita's incessant refusals to date Margaret, took a swing at her, something unexpected happened. Bita, who had always seemed unwavering and proud, was suddenly on her knees in front of him. Her actions, though the spontaneous result of trying to avoid conflict, led to a sudden release of tension between them. Luther, who had expected resistance or even a struggle, suddenly found himself stunned by this gesture of submission. He left, leaving word that he would not allow Bita to hurt Margaret in the future. This moment was a turning point for Bita, a moment when she was forced to face not only external judgment but also internal self-reflection. Her embarrassment and sudden humility in the face of the threat from Luther opened deep cracks in her otherwise so impenetrable armature of pride and self-confidence. In the back of her mind, Bita felt that her act was not an act of weakness, but rather an unintentional step toward some kind of redemption, an attempt to change the path she had so confidently traveled so far. The decision to humble herself and let Luther know that she would no longer interfere in Margaret's relationship was not so much an act of surrender as an effort to secure herself from further downfall. It was both an admission of his own mistakes and an attempt to protect his heart from further turmoil. But in the depths of her soul, Bita knew that her motives were not wholly noble. Part of her desire to retreat was to keep Luther from Margaret, not out of love for him, but rather out of a desire to possess what she could not have. This complex web of feelings and motivations made Bita Alden an unambiguous heroine, her actions intertwined with both a sincere desire for change and the dark strings of her own ego. That afternoon, as the shadows in the room began to stretch softly, heralding the coming of evening, Bita, finding herself in an unfamiliar role, performed an act that might have seemed commonplace in a different setting. She ordered Margaret to be brought in. This moment was not a simple desire to see her friend. It was the beginning of something grand, a turning point in history where every action could lead to unpredictable consequences. While waiting for Margaret, Bita, like a captain before a storm, took in her future by opening the assignment menu. Through the lines of text, there was a difficult condition. In order to return to her world, Bita had to complete the game. This moment carried the weight of responsibility and the realization that mistakes were not allowed. For otherwise, she risked staying in this virtual world forever, trapped in Bita's body. To some, it might have seemed like a dash of hope, but not to her. Having been one of the developers of this game in the past, Bita felt a certain excitement and anticipation for the upcoming challenges that now rested on her shoulders. Margaret, on the other hand, was not just a character in this game. She was the favorite creation of Kang Hyun-ah, a mysterious figure whose name was well known among the creators and players. But Margaret played a much larger role in this story than anyone had realized. She was the main cause of Bita's death, an ornate knot of fate that now had to be untied by Kang Hyun-ah, who was in Bita's body. This move to get closer to Margaret wasn't just a strategic move, it was the beginning of a journey to right the wrongs of the past, an attempt to change his own destiny and perhaps even the fate of the game itself. Thus, with the order to meet Margaret began a story intertwined with mysteries and riddles, the quest to learn and to change the established rules. Bita, who found herself at the epicenter of these events, became a key figure in a game where every move could lead to both triumph and tragedy. In this story, where reality and virtuality are intertwined into a single tangle, we had to find answers to questions that could change the whole perception of the world and ourselves. When the door finally swung open and Margaret stepped into Bita's room, the air was filled with heavy anticipation. Bita, looking up at her, felt a sudden burst of emotion that made her eyes fill with tears. Those tears rolling down her cheeks were not just an expression of sadness or joy. They were a symbol of the deep exultation of seeing someone she considered not just a character in the game, but a beloved creature of her world. Showing the care that was so important at this moment, Bita asked a question about Margaret's well-being, trying through her tears to find answers that might comfort her own heart. Those tears were more than just an expression of their own feelings. They were a bridge connecting the two worlds, the real and the virtual, in which both of them found themselves involved. Bita's apology for her evil actions, delivered through tears, was a powerful gesture of contrition and an attempt to rebuild broken trust. Margaret, looking at Bita with warmth and understanding, embraced her, as if trying with her warmth to melt the ice in her heart, which was gripped by fear and uncertainty. Her words that she had never taken offense were like balm to my soul. They healed wounds and gave me hope for a new beginning. In this exchange of sincere feelings and simple but meaningful gestures, Bita found more than forgiveness. She found a promise and a determination never to let Margaret face the evil of the world. This vow was a testament to how great the power of kindness can be and how it can change the course of events. The conversation about Luther yelling at Bita caused Margaret to feel instant anger. This emotion awakened in Margaret was not just a reaction to the story, it was a reflection of deep feelings of justice and defense of loved ones. In that moment, a special bond was formed between the two characters, an intertwining of destinies that promised not only challenges, but hope for a better future for both. After her emotional encounter with Margaret, Bita's life continued to carry its challenges. Sitting in front of a carefully prepared meal, she felt not just hunger, but a thirst for knowledge about the world she was to survive in. An inner voice suggested that her understanding of local etiquette and traditions was as shallow as her familiarity with these dishes spread out on the table before her. She realized that every wrong gesture or word could cause irreparable consequences. The family dinners at Belita's father's house every 2 weeks were not only a meal, but also an arena where each of the heirs had a chance to demonstrate their wealth and skill with words. In these verbal duels, Belita's brothers competed with each other in an attempt to win their father's approval, each seeking to emphasize their uniqueness and merits by using wit and diplomacy in their conversations. In such an atmosphere filled with rivalry and power-seeking, Belita felt like an outsider. She was afraid that her true identity might be revealed because her behavior was so different from her family's usual manners. Sitting silently, she barely touched her food, fearing that even the smallest action might give her away. This thought possessed her whole, making her think about her every move, word, look. She realized that to be successful in this world, she needed to master not only knowledge of local customs and traditions, but also the ability to mask her anxiety and insecurities. Thus, in anticipation that every moment of the family dinner could be decisive in her fate, Belita searched for ways to adapt to a new reality where every step and decision mattered a great deal. She realized that in order to keep her secret and be able to act further, she would have to learn to play by the rules of this world, hiding her true self under the mask of a flawless heiress. The moment Belita finally gathered her courage and decided to start eating, she could not have guessed that her attempt to enjoy her meal would turn out to be a real ordeal. Her manner of using cutlery, though seeming to be the most silent and discreet, was in fact loud enough to attract the attention of the whole family. The family seemed to expect her to be completely silent, and any rustle seemed a challenge to them. So it was not surprising that shortly after her meal began, they issued an order for complete silence. Belita, trying to adjust to the strict rules of this unusual family, tried to eat as quietly as possible. However, her efforts were interrupted by an unexpected incident. A piece of steak was thrown at her. This act of aggression was accompanied by a loud shout from her father accusing her of trying to cause a scandal. The situation quickly escalated and she was forced to leave the dining room without finishing her lunch. Luther, one of the family members, picked her up, calling her a disgrace, and helped her out of the room. Outside the dining room, Belita felt the weight of what had happened. She remained seated in front of the door, pondering the strangeness and injustice of the world. She was familiar with this feeling, the feeling of misunderstanding and rejection she had encountered in her home world as well. This sad realization suddenly sharpened her desire not just to come to terms with the situation, but to find a way to improve Belita's standing in this world before having to return to reality. Her determination was ironclad. She set out to change the family's perception of her person, to prove her worth, and perhaps to teach them something important they seemed not to know or had forgotten. In this challenging endeavor, Belita saw not only a way to better herself in this world, but also an opportunity to overcome the same challenges she faced at home. Diving into the dark corners of current events through the pages of the newspapers, Belita couldn't escape the feeling of growing dread. Every article, every report seemed only to confirm that the world she had entered held deep and dark secrets. But it was Ananth who was at the center of her attention. Magic here was not just an element of folklore or a distant echo of ancient legends. It was woven into the very fabric of existence, becoming an integral part of everyday life. The tools with which people could invoke and control magical powers were symbols of power and status. The Alden clan, to which Belita belonged, played a key role in supplying such items directly to the emperor, thus ensuring influence and respect among the highest echelons of power. However, the process of creating these magical instruments was a dark secret. They were made from people who had been kidnapped for this dark craft. This revelation struck Belita to the core. If a kidnapped person was found to have mana, their fate was sealed to be transformed into one of these powerful artifacts. And those who lacked magical power met an equally cruel fate. They were auctioned off as Ananth, which was synonymous with hopelessness and despair for many. This knowledge was not just a revelation for Belita, but a challenge. She realized that she was at the heart of a system that creates suffering and injustice. From this realization, not only a deep empathy for those who were victims of such cruel practices was born in her soul, but also an unwavering desire to change the existing order of things. After all, once at the center of events, she could try to find a way to put an end to this horrifying practice, using her position in the Alden clan and perhaps her unique abilities to bring change to this world before it was too late. In light of the Ananta auction, a day shrouded in tradition and mysterious rituals, Belita decided to pursue a bold plan to go exploring. Finding simple, inconspicuous clothing to blend in with the crowd proved to be a challenge, but Margaret came to her aid. She provided the necessary attire that allowed Belita to avoid unnecessary attention. Belita then proceeded to scrutinize the system map, which revealed to her not only the publicly accessible routes, but also the secret passageways that promised her safe entry to Ananth. With ease, like a shadow slipping through the night, Belita made her way to the auction, a place where no one could have anticipated her presence. She hoped her presence would go unnoticed, especially to persons like Luther, who had tried unsuccessfully to arrange a meeting with Margaret. Belita was aware of the potential presence of other familiar characters whose appearance could bring unexpected twists to her mission. The auction began with the slaves taking the stage, each equipped with bracelets and collars ready to explode at the slightest attempt to escape. The sight was horrifying, and Belita's breath caught in disgust and anger at what was happening before her eyes. The realization that it was she who had once developed mechanisms of this nature, seeing it as an innocent part of the game in her world, caused her deep regret and painful feelings. That moment was a cruel reminder to her of how far the consequences of game inventions can go when they are turned into reality. The event culminated when the last auction item, twins from the Tang clan, was brought on stage, which came as a real shock to Belita. The Tan clan was known for its unwavering tenacity and power, dwelling in the vast expanse of the savannah, where the wind told ancient legends and the earth held the traces of countless battles. This people were distinguished by special features. Sometimes among them children were born with heterochromia, when one eye shone deep blue color, like a bottomless sky before the storm, and the second, warm yellow, reminiscent of the bright sun at its zenith. These twins had just such unique eyes, making their appearance at the auction even more tragic and unexpected. In Belita's heart, this moment left a deep mark. According to the plot of a game she had once been involved in creating, these twins were destined to play a fateful role in her own death. The virtual world, which had seemed to her a safe space for creativity, suddenly took on the terrifying features of reality in which she now found herself hostage to her own inventions. In the game, the twins were unable to escape their fate at the auction and were killed before the main events began, transforming into a magical item that subsequently brought untold destruction to the world, leaving Belita among its victims. The desire to save the twins is due not only to the desire to change the fate predetermined in the game, but also a deep realization of Belita that every action, every choice in this new world for her, can have unpredictable and far-reaching consequences. She decided to act, guided not only by the knowledge of the upcoming events from the game, but also by her heart, which told her to prevent tragedy at all costs, even if it meant defying fate itself. In the depths of her thoughts, Belita was faced with a dilemma that seemed hopeless. There was no means of redemption, and time was ticking inexorably, leaving her trapped in circumstances where every moment could be decisive. But fate seemed determined to intervene, providing an unexpected turn of events that might have seemed too surprising to be true in real life. A new task flashed on the screen in front of Belita, like a magic lantern lighting the way in the darkness. The task offered not just a rescue, but a strategic benefit: free the twins and earn their loyalty and support as allies in the trials ahead. The fate of the twins and Belita was now intertwined by invisible threads of destiny, creating new possibilities and perspectives. Having accepted the task, Belita felt a surge of strength and optimism, which was reflected in her smile, the smile of a person who saw a ray of light at the end of the tunnel. With words that sounded like a bold statement, she announced the price for the twins' freedom, 12 million. But it wasn't just a number chosen at random. The moment she accepted the mission, Belita found her account replenished by 70 million in local currency, an amount unimaginable to ordinary reality, but quite realistic in a game setting. This fact didn't just surprise her, but confirmed that the rules of this world allowed for the acquisition of riches that could turn fortunes around. Interestingly, the amount allocated was exactly the same as the money the game itself, in which all of this took place, was sold for. This fact added a special irony to the story and at the same time emphasized the unpredictability of the game world, where the virtual and the real can intertwine in the most unexpected ways. Belita now possessed the means to not only free the twins, but to greatly strengthen her position in the trials to come. That money belonged to her completely, opening a new chapter in her adventures where every step could lead to unknown highs or unpredictable lows. As the auction neared its conclusion, the tension in the air was palpable. The hall froze in anticipation, but no one dared to outbid Belita's proposed amount. Thus, the twins were given to Belita's will, symbolically emphasized by a plaque with the number 44. Leaving the auction room, the trio found themselves in a narrow alley where the shadows of the buildings gave the illusion of privacy and secrecy. Concerned for safety, Belita looked around warily and asked the twins if there were any intruders in the immediate vicinity. The twins, still reeling from the stress and humiliation they had endured, were extremely aggressive. To prove her honest intentions and gain the trust of these young men, Belita took a drastic and dramatic step. With sudden determination, she stabbed herself a shallow wound with the knife, and blood trickled down. With that very blood, she touched the exploding bracelets that shackled the twins' wrists. Under the influence of her blood, which carried the powerful magical influence of the Alden family, the restraining devices began to melt like snow in the hot sun, freeing the twins from their shackles. After this demonstration of incredible strength and willingness to make a sacrifice for them, Belita made a request to the twins, the contents of which remained unknown. As soon as she began to speak, however, the twins suddenly pulled her to the ground. Their eyes reflected something Belita hadn't expected, a flicker of understanding and perhaps the beginning of trust. They stated that Belita exuded the same odor they had smelled from the man who had once made them his slaves. This discovery made the twins look at Belita differently, for in her could lurk not only an ally but also the key to unraveling their own past and perhaps their future release from the inner demons that had so cruelly haunted them. Using your knowledge and experience as well as the magical abilities provided by the game, Belita created a cake out of thin air which suddenly appeared in front of the surprised twins. Hunger, reinforced by the long time in captivity, made them forget their aggression and mistrust, at least for a while they enjoyed the unexpected treat. This moment was a turning point in their relationship with Belita. The twins, encouraged yet puzzled by this turn of events, were no longer trying to appear as threatening as before. Seeing the change in their mood, Belita offered them a deal. She was willing to let them go free, but in return she asked for help in rescuing other slaves sold at auction. It was a risk, but Belita was counting on the fact that a common goal and the desire for freedom could bring them together. The twins, caught off guard by her suggestion, realized the gravity of the situation. Belita's threat to make them spit the cake back out was probably a joke, but it conveyed to them the seriousness of her intentions. Realizing that what stood before them was not just someone who wanted to use them for his own purposes, but a man who was willing to offer them a chance at true freedom and a chance to change their destiny, the twins agreed to help. Before leaving, Belita handed them a handkerchief soaked in her blood, which served not only as a symbol of their new alliance, but also as a practical tool. The power contained in the Alden's blood gave them the ability to free other slaves, breaking magical shackles as easily as she had done for them. So, Belita moved on, leaving the twins with a handkerchief and a new purpose. This gesture of trust and cooperation laid the foundation for their future actions and was the first step toward freeing the other captives, a task that was now common to them all. Surrounded by the ruins of a once proud auction hall where the fates of the defenseless were traded, Noah Elsius, phlegmatic at first glance, had an appearance of calm and collected, but inside him there was a lot of passion and irritation. The events of the last few hours had gotten out of hand. All the slaves that were up for auction took advantage of the moment of chaos and disappeared into the dark corners of the night. Among those who escaped were the ones he had high hopes for, the Tang twins. He couldn't bear the thought of them slipping from his grasp, and he was even more disturbed by a mysterious figure capable of such a drastic and audacious move as buying and freeing slaves. At this time, in the distant asylum, Belita was gripped by a disturbing dream. Her nightmares were filled with images of Noah Elsius, whose mad energy and unpredictability caused her deep terror. Despite his impeccable appearance, powerful magical abilities, and high social standing that made him a desirable partner for many players in the game, the truth was much darker. His attractive facade concealed a cruel nature. Players who wished to join him were inevitably condemned to imprisonment in the dark dungeons of his castle, where the light of hope was extinguished among the stone walls. Filled with relief and a subtle note of joy, Belita still found the strength to smile amidst the darkness of her nightmares. Despite everything, the Tan twins had honored her request by destroying the auction and freeing the slaves, and this ray of light in the darkness was a source of comfort to her. Belita's father's anger over the destruction of the auction only added fuel to the fire of her inner triumph. In this kaleidoscopic mixture of feelings and events, the fates of the characters intertwined, each contributing to the complex mosaic of the epic unfolding before us. The turmoil and chaos left in the wake of the auction's destruction seemed only a distant echo to Belita, whose heart beat in unison with her own conviction and joy at the successful escape of the Tan twins. This moment was broken by Luther, his sudden appearance embodying all the tension and anxiety that could be expected around the corner after such an event. His voice, filled with questions and bewilderment at Belita's unyielding calmness, cut through the air, creating a sense of urgency to resolve all the problems that had arisen. However, Belita, as if she were the lord of the situation, not only kept her composure but also managed to turn the arrows of sarcasm towards Luther. Her words, laden with irony and nitpicking about his failures in his personal life and potential repercussions from their father, made one wonder about the depth and complexity of their relationship. Without wasting a second, Belita reminded Luther of his fixation on Margaret, which could lead not only to his own troubles, but also to possible consequences for Margaret herself, emphasizing her position as the junior but no less powerful figure in their family hierarchy. Belita's statement was not unreasonable. Her every word, gesture, and facial expression unwittingly encouraged Luther to rethink his actions and priorities. In this brief exchange of remarks between brother and sister, flashed not only mutual affection, but also hidden contradictions reflecting their own aspirations and desires. But the most unexpected and shocking twist for Belita was the appearance of the Tan twins, their figures looming among the leaves on a tree branch like ghosts from the past that had found their way to her very sanctuary against all odds. This moment took her by surprise, making her heart freeze with the surprise and unexpectedness of the encounter. Belita's gaze, fixed on the twins, reflected a whole range of emotions, from joy and relief to bewilderment and shock at the realization that these two were now a part of her world, suddenly and unpredictably breaking into its reality. At one beautiful and completely unexpected moment, the whole world seemed to freeze in anticipation of something unusual. Belita, as if sensing the tension in the air, suddenly became lively and, without wasting a second, sharply turned to Luther. Her voice sounded commanding and determined, causing the young man to involuntarily back away. "Get out!" The flash of anger in her eyes was so vivid that Luther was speechless for a moment. He felt his insides freeze with surprise. Standing in front of her, he thought, pondering the reasons for her sudden change. What could have changed Belita so much that even his presence was beginning to irritate her even more? The second Luther was trying to solve this mystery, Belita, as if by magic, began to let the two twins in through the window. Her actions were swift and decisive, and her eyes read genuine surprise. "How did you find me?" Her question hung in the air, but there was no answer. The twins only looked at her in silence, their gazes full of reproach, as if they wanted to convey something important to her, but couldn't or wouldn't speak aloud. The atmosphere of tension between them grew with every second until it resolved in an unexpected way. Suddenly, breaking the silence, the twins announced that they could smell meat. The words took Belita by surprise, but she instantly understood the reason for their reproach. The realization that she had forgotten to share the meat with them awakened her guilt. Without the slightest hesitation, she hurriedly corrected her mistake by taking out the prepared meat from her inventory. Her gesture was so unexpected and sincere that the twins, unable to contain their hunger, literally pounced on the offered food. This moment was filled not only with a sense of restoring justice, but also with the realization that even in a world where every day can bring unexpected challenges, there is always room for kindness and mutual help. Belita, Luther, and the twins were caught up in a whirlwind of events where every action and decision could change the course of their destinies. But in this moment, they were together, supporting each other, ready to face any challenges that were yet to come their way. After the twins had satisfied their hunger, Belita turned to thank them. Her gratitude was due to the fulfillment of a request she hadn't mentioned out loud, but they had somehow managed to guess her wishes and fulfill them. The twins were both bewildered and delighted at the same time. They concluded that this was none other than a real magician, able to read minds at a distance and possessing secret knowledge. The question of how she could materialize objects straight out of thin air occupied their minds, adding an element of mysticism and the unknowable to their interactions with Bita. The twins, shortly after the conversation, made an unexpected announcement. They decided that they would stay by Bita's side, to protect her from any threat and to thank her for her kindness. Moreover, they expressed their desire for revenge against the man who had once made them his slaves. It was a moment of true revelation for them, a moment when they realized that the patron they had found could change their destiny. However, Bita, upon hearing their plans for revenge, could not contain her laughter. Her reaction was unexpected. She said that although she might have liked the idea of her father's death, at the moment it was unacceptable. Her words enveloped the space with irony and a subtle hint of the depth of her own plans, in which her father, despite everything, played a key role. Bita skillfully evaded a direct answer about her intentions, leaving the twins puzzled and simultaneously admiring her cunning and foresight. This episode revealed not only the versatility of Bita's character, but also her ability to see far beyond the current moment, to plan her actions based not only on her own desires, but also on the real benefit of her actions. The twins, being in her presence, felt like they were part of something great, not fully understanding the scope of her intentions, but determined to support her in whatever endeavors she undertook. In the shadows of a mysterious world where fates are intertwined with conspiracies and secrets, Bita has become the center of attention for her twin brother and sister, Raheel and Roxa. These two, despite their promise not to harm Bita's father, still expressed an unwavering desire to become her protectors. They were attracted not only to Bita herself, but also to the aura of unknown adventure that enveloped her. The twins claimed that only a member of the Tang clan was capable of saving their brethren, and yet Bita was the first in years to not only dare to lend a helping hand to one of them, but to spill her blood for it. In gratitude and admiration, Rachel and Roxa expressed their desire to see Bita alive and well. When Bita, realizing the depth and gravity of the circumstances, made her request to the twins, her words were full of determination. She asked them to find Austin Hill, a key figure on whom her fate and possibly salvation depended. This was not just an errand, it was a mission that could be influenced not only by strength and agility, but also by a deep understanding of what consequences might follow their actions. It had been 4 days since Bita's words had been spoken to Raheel and Roxa, and here she was, sitting in her room, unable to hide her disappointment as she gazed at the bag before her. This sack became a symbol of unexpected and possibly unwanted developments. The twins did find Austin Hill, but they chose the most radical and dangerous method, kidnapping. Now Bita was faced with the task of not only deciding how to handle the situation, but also how to justify such a choice to herself and to Austin Hill, who was no doubt in a state of shock and bewilderment. Bita's thoughts swirled as she searched for a way out of the predicament she found herself in due to the decisions made by her new allies. How could she use this situation to her advantage without causing even more harm to those involved in this maelstrom of events? Each moment of reflection brought her closer to the realization that the upcoming decisions would affect not only her fate, but also the further development of relations between all the participants in this story. In a world where fates are intertwined with deeds not of their own accord, where every choice leads to unforeseen consequences, Austin Hill stood out as a key figure in the game's storyline, becoming a commander-in-chief whose decisions and actions carried weight with the protagonists. In his hands was the power not only to command but to influence the fates of those who followed him, leading them to victory over the sinister Bita. In this virtual world where each character had their own unique history and personality, the twins, key allies, expected her to recognize their achievements. And so, after a long-awaited moment of silence, Bita, a character that embraced versatility and contradiction, expressed her encouragement to them, giving them a token of her respect. Bita, appearing before Austin, asked him about his condition as if feeling genuinely concerned. Austin, who was in her power, did not hide his amazement and confusion, noting that she was acting similarly to those who had kidnapped him, which only added tension to the already heated atmosphere of the meeting. He, feeling a growing uneasiness, could not conceal his excitement in asking about his future fate. Bita, for her part, confidently declared that he was in no danger, which should have been a comfort to Austin, but he couldn't help but think that Bita's father was behind his kidnapping. His hunch was correct, but Bita's answer made him look at the situation from a new angle. She revealed her true intentions to him, betraying her own father, which amounted to a desire to free herself from his oppressive influence. Austin, absorbed in a whirlwind of feeling and reflection, was stunned by her words. His view of Belita began to change when she mentioned her efforts to free the slaves, a clear indication of her dissimilarity to the Alden family. These actions of Belita's were the cry of her soul's desire to change and prove that she was not succumbing to the genetically laid down fate of her kind. Austin, still doubting her true motives, was forced to admit that his initial opinion of her may have been mistaken. The conversation about the paycheck, which Belita began by mentioning the huge sum paid for the twins, suddenly dispelled all his doubts. It was as if the spell had broken, and Austin, sensing a whiff of new possibilities, agreed to be a part of her plan, anticipating not only the reward, but also the opportunity to take a path different from the one he had traveled before. At a moment when silence usually shrouds mysteries and enigmas, Count Elad found solace in a conversation with Graham Cordis. Through heavy tears, the Earl shared his grief over Austin's disappearance, as if a bottomless chasm of pain and loss had opened in his heart. Graham, standing before him, had mixed feelings, ranging from surprise to bewilderment. The Earl had just recently announced his intention to take Austin into the ministry, which made his disappearance all the more mysterious and incomprehensible. Like a jigsaw puzzle needing to be assembled, pieces began to fit together in Graham's mind, eager to find out who was able to convince Austin to leave such a lucrative position. At the same time, in another corner of the castle, in a room where every object was filled with stories of the past, Belita and Margaret were in deep thought across from each other. The atmosphere was saturated with an invisible tension, for Belita's thoughtful gaze was causing Margaret anxiety. The latter could not get rid of the thought that the family troubles were once again hanging over Belita like dark clouds before a storm. In an attempt to dispel doubts and offer comfort, Margaret broke the silence by expressing her desire to be more than a friend to Belita, but a true sister. These words, like rays of light through the clouds, brought a smile to Belita's face. She replied that Margaret was already a sister to her and suggested that they both looked at their relationship as just that, a sisterly relationship. But the proposal was so unexpected and touching that Margaret felt the slight embarrassment so rare for deep and sincere moments of mental intimacy. Thus, in the castle, where every wall holds echoes of the past, the fates of people unfolded, intertwining with each other in a complex and unpredictable way. The relationships between the characters developed like a slow dance, where every step and look has its own meaning, and words are often unspoken but felt with the heart. As soft rays of light broke through the window shutters, creating a play of shadows and light on the walls of the room, Belita turned to Margaret with a question that had long occupied her thoughts. She asked if Luther continued to annoy Margaret as he had before. Margaret, whose eyes brightened with relief for a moment, shared that to her delight his annoying attention had lessened considerably. Belita, always ready to stand up for her sister, firmly stated that she would take the solution to this problem into her own hands. The affectionate touch on Margaret's head was full of promises that no one would get hurt in the process. This gesture of comfort ended with a warm and affirming hug, as if to protect her from all the storms of the outside world. When Belita entered the room where Austin was already in the room, as if reading her thoughts and intentions, he asked about her desire to make Margaret happy. With unwavering confidence in her eyes, Belita nodded, confirming her intentions. She expressed her belief that Margaret needed a man who would not only genuinely court her, but would also be a vivid proof to Luther of his own unimportance. In her musings, Belita considered two candidates capable of embodying the role: the Prince of the Empire, Kyle Lucius, and the head of the knightly order, Graham Cordis. She was so determined in her intentions to secure Margaret's happiness that she was even prepared to take such an extreme step as to kidnap either of them, if only Margaret would express the slightest preference in favor of one. This dialogue reveals to us the complex intertwining of the characters' feelings and motivations, where good intentions are intertwined with daring plans, and sincere concern for the happiness of another collides with unorthodox methods of achieving it. In the event that Margaret could not find a suitable companion, Belita was determined to take on the protection and well-being of her ward, embodying the role of not just a protector but a loyal friend ready for any challenge. This intention of Belita's was reinforced by the realization that they had 4 years ahead of them, 3 years before the key events of the game and 1 year to develop them. This time frame allowed for ample time to plan actions and preparations for upcoming events. Belita sincerely hoped for Austin's help, who in turn expressed full willingness to support her in these endeavors, as did the twins. Their unity and agreement gave Bita confidence that what she had planned could be realized. The next 4 years proved to be a time of not only waiting and preparation, but also action. During this time, Bita has managed to gather a reliable team around her, increase her capital, and create a basis for the realization of her plans. It is unusually important to note that the team formed around Bita and Austin always welcomed Bita cheerfully, even though the day-to-day management and organization of activities was largely taken over by Austin. This indicated a high level of trust and respect for Bita as the leader and mastermind behind the whole endeavor. These years passed quickly, filled with events, decisions, and actions that laid the foundation for future challenges and victories. With each day spent preparing and interacting, Bita and her companions not only came closer to realizing their goals, but also grew stronger as a team ready to face any challenge. In this situation, the actions of Bita and Margaret represent a complex game of strategy and diplomacy. Bita, with her mysterious order to gather weeds, is acting on a plan whose meaning is not obvious to others, hinting at the depth of her strategic thinking and the possible use of weeds in some unconventional but effective manner in the future. Her decision not to explain the details of the order emphasizes the verticality of power in their relationship, as well as her confidence in her decision. Margaret, on the other hand, faces a real threat to her guild due to financial problems. Reports show losses, and the only meaningful source of income, contributions from Aldens, is unable to cover expenses, jeopardizing the guild's future. Margaret realizes the gravity of the situation and is willing to seek help from Bita, which shows her pragmatism and ability to act in a crisis. The arrival of a representative of the Satar clan adds a new element to an already confusing situation. Margaret reacts with diplomacy, ordering the guest room to be prepared. This decision could open up new opportunities for Margaret's guild, perhaps offering a path to financial stabilization or a new partnership. In the cold light of morning, when the shadows still played on the ancient walls of the city, a fated meeting took place. Margaret, whose figure loomed in the mist like a silhouette from the distant past, faced Mr. Lucille. His appearance was no less sudden than the solutions he proposed. Without wasting a moment, as if afraid that the moment would disappear as quickly as it had appeared, Lucille went bluntly to the heart of the proposal. He asked Margaret to sell him a statue of a one-eyed cat, an object seemingly not worth much attention, but one that held deep meaning. As a token of gratitude and as a down payment for the statue, Lucille held out to Margaret something very unusual and valuable, the amulet of the Satar clan. This most mysterious stone was more than just a jewel. It was shrouded in legends and myths. It was said that the possession of this stone provided its owner not only wealth and respect among others, but also a connection with ancient magical forces. This amulet was said to have once adorned the domain of Emperor Astatius himself, a legendary ruler whose name was known far beyond his domain. All these fables and tales of the great power of the amulet made Lucille's offer truly incredible, especially considering that he was only asking for a small statue in return. Margaret, amazed at the generosity and possible consequences of such an exchange, could not hide her surprise. Her answer was as unexpected as the offer itself. She stated that if Lucille was truly willing to pay such a high price for the statue, then it meant that it had true value far beyond the material. And in this light, Margaret decided not to sell the cat, but to give it away for free. Her decision was driven less by calculation than by a desire to see how the events set in motion by this incredible exchange would unfold. After the exchange had been made, Margaret, feeling the weight of the consequences of her decision, expressed only one wish. She asked Lucille to take charge of the one-eyed cat statue. Her request sounded like a simple plea, but it concealed a deep concern for the fate she was placing in someone else's hands. Lucille, realizing the weight of the moment, agreed to her condition. In recognition of Margaret being part of something great, he did present her with the amulet of the Satar clan. He confidently declared that among all possible candidates, she was the most suitable person for his domain. The gesture was not only an affirmation of trust in her character, but also a recognition of her role in the events to come. Lucille's actions followed suddenly and quickly, like lightning cutting the sky. He literally jumped out the window, leaving Margaret to ponder the rapid turn of fate. His last words, spoken with a boldness bordering on madness, sounded both hopeful and cautionary at the same time. He hoped that Magnus, probably the key figure in their story, had not miscalculated about the cat. These words left a sense of impending trials in the air and magic hovering around this mysterious statuette. As if by magic, at that moment Bita passed by. Her presence in this place was no accident. Like everyone else in the story, she had a part to play, though at that moment she had only heard Lucille's strange speeches. Despite her curiosity, Bita did not interfere, continuing on her way. In her heart, she felt that she had witnessed the beginning of something great and inexplicable. Bita intuitively understood that these events were triggering the mechanisms of a big game in which everyone would find their place and their destiny. This moment, when timelines intertwined and reality began to play by new rules, was the beginning of the journey for all of them. That evening, as the silvery rays of the moon slid through the clear glass, giving the dinner a special, almost magical hue, the atmosphere in the room was filled with warmth and comfort. Bita, the personification of grace and nobility, sat at the table opposite Margaret. Her gaze was full of interest, and she had a slight smile on her face, as if she were ready for every word Margaret was about to say. While Margaret, enveloped in an aura of mystery, began a narrative that must have surprised even the most sophisticated listener. Margaret, whose stories were always full of depth and substance, shared a story so exciting and unexpected that even Bita, accustomed to extraordinary twists of fate, could not hide her surprise. At the climax of her narrative, Margaret pulled from beneath her robes the Satar Amulet, an ancient amulet shrouded in legend and mysticism. The amulet, symbolizing protection and light in Margaret's hands, began to emit a quiet but bright light, as if responding to the goodness and purity of her heart. The moment was full of magic. The light of the amulet, shimmering, illuminated the faces of those present, reflected in the eyes of Bita, who could not look away. Her smile grew wider as she watched this miracle, realizing the deep connection between Margaret and the amulet. However, when Margaret, with innocence and generosity, offered to give the amulet to Bita, the atmosphere in the room changed. Bita suddenly felt a wave of panic. She knew the meaning of the gesture, realizing the full weight of responsibility that Satar's amulet carried. There was alarm in her voice as she began to urge Margaret to reconsider her decision, reminding her of the possible disappointment of someone who had once entrusted Margaret with such a priceless gift. Bita, confused by her own feelings and with a trembling voice, tried to convey to Margaret the gravity of the moment, praying that Margaret would keep the amulet as a reminder of her purpose and path. Returning to her domain after an unexpectedly eventful evening, Bita found that the day was not yet over for her. Her faithful assistant, a woman not only skillful in business but sensitive to circumstances, announced with some anxiety in her voice that Austin, who was in charge of business transactions and economic matters, wished to see Bita as soon as possible. The department, according to the aide, has a backlog of unresolved issues that need immediate attention. Realizing the importance of the moment and unwilling to let matters stand, even while under the impression of recent events, Bita made a decision. She quickly adjusted her plans, sending an aide to Margaret to provide protection and support in her absence. The gesture emphasized the deep connection and care Bita felt for her loved ones. When she arrived at the office, where Austin was waiting for her, Bita immediately felt the tense atmosphere of work in the air. Austin got to the point without any preamble or pretense, urging Bita to get down to business. However, Bita, undaunted by her nobility and her known knack for solving problems in unconventional ways, offered Austin a fair deal. If he was so interested in her immediate employment, let him take over some of her duties, particularly the management of Alden Manor. Austin, faced with the unexpected offer, hastened to reject it, realizing that the burden of running the estate was too great for him. Instead of long negotiations and discussions, he simply handed Bita a stack of documents regarding cases that required her immediate attention. Among other things, he mentioned that they would soon be facing a shortage of storage space for the weed Bita was growing. This moment emphasized not only the endless stream of responsibilities Bita faced on a daily basis, but also the importance of her role in managing and maintaining balance in all aspects of her varied activities. Austin, with his usual seriousness and depth of vision, shared information about the current situation in the Andra Guild, which has long been notorious for its criminal connections. This guild lately seemed to have crossed an invisible line, delving even deeper into dark deeds, turning criminal activities into a kind of credo. Every day, their influence spread wider and wider, enveloping the city like a dense fog in which it became increasingly difficult to distinguish between law and lawlessness. At the same time, Bita, as the embodiment of justice and nobility, dedicated herself to fighting this darkness. Her mission was to eradicate crime from the streets like weeds from fertile soil in an effort to ensure that Margaret, the symbol of innocence and purity, would have a safe and happy future. Belita realized that every step she took against the Andra Guild covered her own path with thorns and heralded new trials, but her resolve was as strong as steel. Realizing the gravity of the situation and the potential dangers that could befall her and Margaret because of her confrontation with the Guild, Belita made the weighty but only possible decision under the circumstances, to sever all ties with Andra. This step was extremely difficult as each interaction with the Guild led her further down a path of danger and uncertainty. But deep down she felt that her choice led to the light, to a world where truth and justice would triumph over the darkness and chaos that dominated the heart of the Andra Guild. In the silence of the night that covered the city under its majestic, star-studded sky, Belita found herself deep in thought. Her thoughts hovered around one disturbing fact. Luther, whose presence was becoming more and more noticeable and oppressive, had increased his surveillance of her. This constant feeling of someone else's eyes peering into her life became more and more intrusive and burdensome, causing her irritation and anxiety. But Luther was not the only source of her inner storms. Her father, with whom relations had long been strained, continued to linger in the house like a storm cloud, ready to vent his anger on her at any moment. His constant shouting and threats to kick her out of the house were just as stressful to Belita as Luther's surveillance. In these musings, she recalled an event that had become something of a dark spot in their family's history, and at the same time a source of special inner pride for her. 3 years ago, Belita became the invisible force that destroyed an auction that was not just an event to sell valuables, but a cornerstone in her family's economic structure. The auction, which had never been recovered from her covert operation, was the main source of income for her house. It was an act she had performed alone and left unsolved, and it added to her self-confidence despite her current trials. In the back of her mind, Belita felt mixed feelings. On the one hand, pride in her bold and decisive action. On the other hand, anxiety and even fear of the consequences that might befall her if the truth came out. But those nightly hours of reflection only hardened her resolve to stand to the end, defending her independence and freedom despite any obstacles that might come her way. At the moment when the night had swallowed the city in its gloom, shrouding every corner with its unexplored mystery, Belita, moving through the dark alleys like a shadow, suddenly found herself faced with a surprise. Her footsteps brought her to the man's body lying breathless on the cold sidewalk. At first, Belita's heart sank, but when she saw that the stranger's chest was still rising, she breathed a sigh of relief. With a note of concern in her voice, she asked if he needed help, to which she received an unexpected response. The man, barely audible, asked her to just pass by. But when Belita leaned closer to examine the face of the man lying before her, she was horrified. It was Noah, whose face she recognized instantly. From surprise and shock, she asked what he was doing here, not hiding her amazement and fear. The moment Noah realized that a familiar face was standing in front of him, his reaction was immediate and harsh. He stated that now that their paths had crossed in this way, he couldn't let her get away with leaving her alive. The statement sounded like a sentence, bringing tension to their meeting and foreshadowing the unpredictable consequences of that night's encounter in the alley. At that moment, the air around them became saturated with danger, and the silence of the night became menacing. Belita, suddenly faced with an unexpected threat, felt her instincts tense, preparing for the inevitable confrontation that could decide her fate. At a moment when Noah's fate hung in the balance, Belita faced a choice that could change them both. Her heart wavered on the edge between a desire to leave him to his fate and an irresistible urge to prevent his demise. The internal conflict was resolved unexpectedly. Belita's silhouette, already ready to disappear into the gloom, stopped, and she overcame herself to throw Noah a healing potion. This gesture, though filled with genuine concern, took on a very different appearance in Noah's eyes. He saw it not as a sign of help, but as a symbol of pity, which only increased his anger. His pride was deeply hurt by this act, which he regarded as an act of charity, a blow to his self-esteem. Belita's reaction to his anger was immediate and unexpected. She exclaimed that her actions were motivated not only by her concern for him, but also by her own fear of losing him. Her words were filled with an emotion that made her heart beat faster. There was sincerity in this confession, but also something more that she herself might not have fully realized. Finishing her speech, Belita abruptly turned and walked away, leaving Noah alone with his thoughts and his newfound health. Despite her departure, the words she had left in the air continued to hang around Noah, leaving him uneasy. His heart, which had recently been full of anger and resentment, now felt confused. Questions began to arise in his mind about what had moved Bita and why her fear for his life had driven her back. These thoughts were new and unusual for Noah, who was used to solitude and independence, but now he felt that something had changed. The situation, seemingly simple and understandable, was now taking on new facets and nuances, forcing him to rethink his views and feelings. In the midst of the intense conflict, when tensions reached their peak, Bita, gripped by fear and confusion, found no choice but to rush to the retreat. Her heart was pounding frantically in her chest, and her mind was shrouded in a fog of fear and indecision. Through this chaos of emotions and thoughts, she found the strength to summon Rahil, her trusted companion and protector in these dark and uncertain times. Rachel, the embodiment of determination and steadfastness, responded instantly to her call. With unquestionable agility and speed, he was at Belita's side, protecting her from all possible threats in the blink of an eye. Taking the girl under his arm, he guided them both to escape, choosing a route that was winding and dangerous across the rooftops of buildings. This path was full of risk, but at the same time offered them the best chance of escape, hiding their movement from prying eyes. As they jumped from rooftop to rooftop, their hearts beat in unison. A mixture of fear, adrenaline, and determination filled the air. At this point, Rachel, undaunted even in the face of a possible mortal threat, declared with a confidence that might have seemed audacious. If Noah, their pursuer, had made a single hostile gesture in their direction, Rachel would not have hesitated to use extreme measures. Bita, listening to his words, couldn't help but recognize the power and strength of Noah, who was not an easy opponent. Her remark about his strength did not go unanswered. Rachel, with a slightly smiling optimism, expressed confidence in their combined strength with Roxa, another of their allies, emphasizing that together they were invincible. It wasn't just a statement of strength, it was a statement of fortitude, a willingness to stand together in the face of any challenge, no matter how insurmountable it may seem. So, with each step and leap across the city's rooftops, Bita and Rachel not only moved further away from the immediate threat, but also strengthened their resolve and mutual support, preparing for new challenges that might come their way. As Bita and Rachel, whose breathing was barely keeping up with the frantic pace of their escape, slowed for a moment, a virtual alert window suddenly appeared in front of Bita. This message, like lightning in a clear sky, announced that their last encounter with the poisoned Noah had opened the door for her to the secret outcome of their story, the end of Noah Elsius. This discovery struck Bita to the core, because until then she had only followed the call of her heart and mind, not realizing the massive consequences of her actions. The realization that it was her actions at the auction that would be the direct cause of Noah's death weighed heavily on her shoulders. Her eyes flashed a reflection of the inner struggle she was having, trying to come to terms with the inevitable and at the same time realizing the tragedy of what was happening. This news didn't just stun her, it shook up the foundations of her worldview, forcing her to rethink many things she was used to. The twins, who always stayed close by, could not remain indifferent to the sudden heaviness Bita was under. Their heightened sense of belonging and attention to each other's emotional state allowed them to instantly sense the change in her mood. They watched her with concern and care, trying to support and ease her anguish, not even fully understanding what had caused such a drastic change. A spark of concern for Bita lit up in their hearts, for they were well aware that such news could have an unpredictable effect on the fragile soul of a person facing the inexorable reality of her election and its consequences. In one of those moments when the atmosphere is filled with heavy anticipation, Bita, as if sensing an invisible thread of fate, gently approaches the twins. Her hug wasn't just a gesture of comfort or a show of affection, it was something more. In the depths of her heart matured the realization that the whirlwind of events in which they were all immersed carried with it other, no less serious causes for concern than Noah's fate alone. Bita realized that the original ending of Noah's story, which she had so carefully kept in her heart, could have hurt Margaret. Noah's death, she thought, was meant to be an unloading moment, taking some of the burden off their shoulders. However, fate had it differently. Noah was found in a dimly lit alley, lying alone, but to everyone's surprise, the potion that was to be his salvation or death was still intact. Noah, consumed with dark thoughts and determination, still held in his heart the hope of finding Bita. for he knew that he could not and had no right to leave her unprotected in this world. His decision was firm and final, despite the severity of the consequences that might follow. Later, when circumstances began to clear up and Noah learned the value of the antidote Bita had provided him, he couldn't help but appreciate her sacrifice. The antidote wasn't just a potion, it was a mixture into which she had put a piece of her soul, her desire to protect him even against his own intentions. Realizing this, Noah finally decides to accept her help and drinks the antidote, thus accepting the care and love she had for him. This moment was a turning point not only for Noah, but for everyone involved in the story, emphasizing the importance of choice, trust, and understanding the depth of feelings that govern people's actions. After Noah took the first sip of the life-saving antidote, he paused, realizing the importance of the moment. Leaving half of the potion untouched, he gave himself and Bita a moment of unspoken gratitude and appreciation. This action was a symbol of his recognition of the kindness she had shown in taking such a risky step for his life. Despite the internal contradictions and dark intentions, this gesture represented the first stepping stone to possible redemption and understanding. Soon afterward, the butler, a man who knew the secrets of many and could appreciate the true value of things, spoke a thought that opened Noah's eyes to many things. He said that the potion was so precious that only members of the ancient and powerful Alden family could afford such a luxury. This revelation put new purpose and determination in Noah's heart. He realized that it was now up to him to personally verify how the Aldens were involved in this story and what exactly they might know about Bita. Noah, tormented by his desire to find Bita, not only because of his dark intentions, but also because of his inability to find her through other channels, set out to track her down at any cost. His adamant decision to kill Bita, despite all the twists of fate and moments when it seemed that a spark of goodness could be born in his heart, remained unchanged. This duality of his feelings and intentions added depth to the story, showing how thin the line is between love and hate, between salvation and death. Luther, with anxiety and hope in his soul, moved restlessly about the room, rereading over and over the lines of the letter he held in his hand. In his heart lived the certainty that fate would finally smile upon him and he would be able to win the heart of Margaret, the girl of his dreams. A letter from a faithful spy brought Luther news that lit up his world with new colors. It told of an extraordinary event. Margaret had become the owner of a Satar Amulet, a thing of not only rare beauty but also of incredible value and power. For Luther, as a representative of an ancient and noble family, such an event could not go unnoticed. The Satar Amulet was not just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of power, protection, and respect. Luther realized that if Margaret became its owner, it greatly elevated her status in the eyes of his family, including his father, whose opinion was crucial in many aspects of Luther's life, including his marriage. Determined and hoping that the information he had received would be the key to resolving his long-held dream of an alliance with Margaret, Luther went to his father. A meeting with his father, the stern and commanding head of the family, was always a serious matter, and this time Luther approached it with special caution and hope. When he told his father of the news the spy had brought, that Margaret now possessed the Satar Amulet, Luther waited for a reaction. The news made an unexpected impression on his father, shocking him to the core. Luther watched every change in his father's facial expression, trying to anticipate his decision. Hope and fear raged in his heart. Hope that his father would recognize the significance of the event and allow marriage to Margaret, and fear that even such a significant event could not change the strictures of the family. So, standing before his father, Luther felt himself on the edge of two worlds, one in which he and Margaret could not be together, and another where Satar's amulet would be the key to their happy future. Luther, in his eagerness to strengthen his position and ensure the success of his proposal, did not miss the opportunity to mention that his sister Bita was also aware of the secret of the Satar amulet. This revelation suddenly triggered a wave of anger in their father, who did not hide his displeasure that his daughter had not shared such important information with him. Apparently, he expected full openness and trust from his family members, and this withholding was perceived as a betrayal of family values. Luther, taking advantage of the moment when his father was still under the impression of the news and his own disappointment in Bita, boldly proposed a solution that might make things right. He proposed the idea that the surest way to obtain the Satar amulet was to allow Luther to marry Margaret. This proposal, in fact, would solve several problems at once. It would strengthen the alliance between the families and provide legitimate access to the valuable artifact. To Luther's surprise, his father, after a brief consideration, agreed to the union and sent Luther off to put it into action. The moment seemed to be the turning point in Luther's long contemplation of a future with Margaret. When he was alone, however, his father allowed himself to express his opinion of his son frankly, calling him an idiot. In his eyes, Luther's plan was nothing more than childish naivete. In the back of his mind, he had no intention of following this marriage plan as a way to get the amulet. On the contrary, he was already considering his own, more direct and decisive plan of action, which was simply to take the artifact away. This turn of events reveals the deep rift between father and son, as well as their differing views on how issues of power and influence should be handled. Luther's father, though seemingly in agreement, continued to be guided by the principles of power and authority, not accepting the peaceful solutions that his son proposed.